Good morning. Welcome to Tulane University. It is my pleasure to introduce our session, Policy, Permits, and Progress, Navigating State and Federal Regulations. If time allows at the end of the session, the panel will take questions submitted by the audience. We will have QR codes on the screen, so you can use those QR codes to submit your questions. But please be sure to silence your cell phones. Please enjoy the conversation. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to our moderator, Tommy Faucheux, the president of LMOGA.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Really excited about this next panel. I am Tommy Faucheux, so president of the Louisiana Mid-Continent Oil and Gas Association. We represent the oil and gas industry here in the state of Louisiana. Everyone from the offshore operators to the refineries, LNG companies, midstream pipeline companies, those producers in the Haynesville Shale, as well as some petrochemicals partners as well, and more recently, companies investing in lower carbon technologies such as carbon capture and sequestration. I am going to move right to introducing this great panel, and what I'll do is I will introduce them and have them share a little bit more about themselves and their organization before we get into questions, but I'm actually going to go ahead and just start on the far side of the stage here with Taylor Childress, representing the Permitting Council. Taylor, why don't you say good morning to everyone?
Thanks, Tommy. Good morning, everyone. My name is Taylor Childress. I'm Chief of Staff for the Federal Permitting Council. For those of you unfamiliar, we're a small independent agency that was set up in the first Trump administration, and we're about 30 employees, and our entire purpose is to be a Sherpa for large infrastructure projects who are looking to go through the federal permitting process. So we have staff who will guide your company through step-by-step the interagency coordination that it takes to get your project permitted through the federal government. Our only qualifications are three things. You have to meet a $200 million threshold for investment for your project. You have to touch NEPA in some way, shape, or form. And you have to be one of our 19 sectors, which range from anything from pipelines to data center development, and so on.
Well, great. Well, glad to have you, Taylor.
Thank you.
The hometown favorite right here next, Eric Smith from Tulane University. Eric, it's always good to be with you, and thanks for having us here at home.
Well, I'm happy to be here, and still.
Yes.
I'm Eric Smith. I spent 35 years in industry, so I'm a little bit familiar with the sorts of things that Taylor and other people are trying to do in Washington. I also spent time as a sort of an unpaid lobbyist for the trade association NOIA. I was on their board, so I was up in Washington on occasion. So I know a little bit about what Ann's doing. So what we're trying to do essentially is get the public aware and our students aware of the structure of the industry and why people can't turn on a dime, why it takes decades sometimes to get projects approved, and how we might be able to streamline that process a little bit going forward. And we're happy to have you all here, and we hope to see you again next year.
Thank you, Eric. Next, Ann Bradbury, American Exploration and Production Council. Ann, tell us a little bit more.
Sure. So I'm the CEO of the American Exploration and Production Council. AXPC represents the leading onshore producers of oil and natural gas. Collectively, our member companies produce about half of all the oil that's produced in the U.S. and about 60% of all of the natural gas. So we're in every major basin across the country. We do have an onshore focus, and I know Louisiana is probably better known for its offshore industry, but Louisiana is actually the third biggest producer of natural gas onshore as well. So a huge amount of natural gas coming from the Haynesville, and we represent the leading producers in the Haynesville as well. So super excited to talk about permitting. It's a huge priority of ours and a very active work stream in Washington right now. So very excited about today's discussion. Thanks to Tommy.
Great to have you, Ann. And then finally, right here to my left, Eric Zimmermann with LLOG. Eric, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? And by the way, I'm just going to point out the snowballs on the ties, the beignets on the socks. You're doing fantastic.
All green. And as an LSU guy,
and
it pained me a little bit, but I am. My name is Eric Zimmermann. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of LLOG Exploration. And I am from New Orleans, a geologist by background, my undergraduate and graduate work at LSU, but I do spend time with Eric here at Tulane, working with the students in the classes, and been proud to have that role. But at LLOG, we are the largest company, exploration company, upstream company, based here in Louisiana. We're proud of that. Our headquarters in Covington, Louisiana, on the North Shore, one of the largest privately held oil companies in the country. I do have a dual role as well. I'm the vice chair, soon to be chair of NOIA, which is the National Ocean Industries Association, which is the group that Eric alluded to, and we're one of the largest groups supporting all parts of industries operating in the water, including exploration companies, drilling companies, marine companies, wind companies, and so on. And so it's proud to be here, happy to be a part of this group, and looking forward to the questions.
Great. Well, thank you. So the title of this panel is Policy, Permits, and Progress, Navigating State and Federal Regulations. And it is a very active time, both here in Louisiana from a regulatory perspective, as we're trying to move forward with new technologies and make sure we're supporting existing businesses. But it's extremely active in Washington right now as well. And so, Ann, I think I'm going to go ahead and just start with you. For those companies, your members who are engaged in onshore E&P, what is working well in the current regulatory environment, and what reforms are needed for future growth and success?
Yeah, great question. So first, in terms of what's working well right now, I want to give a lot of credit to the Trump administration for prioritizing expeditious permit approvals. We've seen, particularly for like APDs on federal lands, under the last administration, this was taking up to a year for a pretty routine permit that could take days on private land and normally even would take a matter of weeks. We've also seen a reversal of the LNG export pause, which means that now our LNG export facilities, which a lot of our companies produce a lot of natural gas for, are getting approved in a much more timely manner and are able to get FID and start exporting as well. So we're incredibly appreciative of the attention that this administration has put on prioritizing permit approvals for sort of the oil and gas value chain, across industry. When I look at what still needs to be done, it's a lot, and it's not necessarily things that this administration can do on its own, because industry as a whole has really long cycle investment horizons that they look at, much longer than a single administration. And so what we are hoping Congress will do, and we are optimistic about, is to bring some reforms to permitting statutes that have been on the books since the 1970s, are woefully outdated, are weaponized, and have expanded far beyond what their intended purpose originally was. So the NEPA statute, which Taylor alluded to, was passed in the 1970s. It was intended to be a coordinating statute, not enforcement statute. It's been weaponized and is now the most litigated statute across all environmental laws, and it is desperately in need of reform. The other thing that a single administration can't do is address what happens in the courts after permits are issued. And litigation has become the most powerful tool to stop big projects from upstream to midstream to downstream, sort of across the value chain. And so we need to bring litigation reform, which again can only happen through Congress. And the goal here overall is not to favor one energy source over another, but to bring some consistency, some predictability, and to depoliticize a lot of these routine permit approval processes, so that the process functions with the appropriate amount of environmental protections as it should, but it doesn't serve as a hindrance to be able to build big energy projects that this country desperately needs.
Great, I appreciate that. Eric, turning to you, more of a Gulf of America, if you will, focus. How does the current framework, how is it working? Where are we seeing successes? We talk about a lot about policy. There's a very rigorous rulemaking process that governs a lot of and regulates a lot of what happens in the offshore space. How do you see things?
I like to say, I'm a geologist by background. We have a lot of engineers who work with this. Is that we're exceptional rule followers, but when the rules change and when you have some uncertainty around rules, that becomes one of the more problematic things that we have to deal with. And a couple of the things that have been brought up here is we had a significant project which called Salamanca. It's supposed to come online here in about 2 weeks, and it's a groundbreaking project, first of its kind, reuse of a previously in production FPU. And it took a lot of work to get it there. And as a small company, we have to work with financial partners to go forward. And for that project, I've been in this business a long time. For that project, when I started to call all of our folks who work on financing, the first 5 questions that they asked were around regulatory environment. And in the Gulf of America, that's never really been a question, right? Can you get your permits? We talked about these long cycle times. This is a project that the first discovery well was made in 2010. The leases were taken out in 2007, and so here we are, 18 years on. And if you have uncertainty of whether you can trudge through that for 18 years, man, it's easy to say no, right? So what we would like to think is, give us the rules. Let's be collaborative with the rules to make sure that we're creating an environment that is is enhancing safety and technology, and then let's codify the rules. I couldn't agree more that different administrations bringing in different policies and different views. In our world, we'd prefer to regulate through the CFR instead of through NTLs. NTLs are notice to lessees, which can be, which don't have the stamp of Congress. And so we are sincere backers of wanting more certainty around policy and getting some of these concepts through Congress. But it's a microcosm of what we see on a daily basis. Of that, the congressional approval is tricky at best.
Yeah, and listening to both of you, when I think of the companies that are here in Louisiana that I represent, the danger that lies in the unpredictability in 2- and 4-year cycles is what really, when I think about the energy economy of the state, really puts us at risk. The energy economy in this state right now accounts for about 25% of the state's economy. So think about that. The companies who are investing here are not making investments based on 2 to 4 year increments. And so when you have this windshield wiper effect of policy, if you don't know what 2 and 4 years look like, and are we going to see a complete reversal every time the occupant of the White House or the leadership in Congress changes, that investment will start to shrink, and that 25% could quickly go away. And
it stops deals. Our
right.
business has enough uncertainty inherent in it with commodity prices, steel prices, labor prices, that to add regulatory risk is really a significant challenge.
We're all proud,
Go ahead, Eric.
too, of the fact that the Gulf Coast has gotten a lion's share of the investment in energy over the last 10 years. What people don't seem to realize is that along the Gulf Coast, half of that investment's in Louisiana. We are not half of the people. We are certainly not half of the production, but we are half of the capital that's been invested.
that's right. And you look at just the recent LNG pause, that pause had real implications. And if that would have lasted much longer, could have been extremely detrimental.
The other thing to remember, too, is that our workers that are, from the president down to the people in the field, those people make more per hour than anybody else in the state as a group. So they represent maybe 15% of the population, but they're more like 25% of the economy.
That's right. So Taylor, a lot of people may not know much about the Permitting Council. Why don't you just go a little bit deeper? What is the goal, the mission? What is the Permitting Council trying to achieve in this administration?
Great question. First, I want to highlight the points of consistency that you all were referencing, because that's exactly what we're trying to do in this administration, consistency. When I was a Capitol Hill staffer I worked with oil and gas industry for a long time, and I heard the same thing. No matter who was in the White House, you want consistency in your regulation. And that's one thing that we are really trying to provide. I completely understand that Congress is on their own timeline. It's very different than the executive branch. That being said, the executive branch is trying to do everything in their power without relying on Congress's reauthorization of permitting reform. That being said, my unofficial hat on, I think that there's a lot that we can do. I completely agree with everything you were saying on shortening the litigation timeline. Extremely important. Actually, I would say personally, probably one of the most important aspects. But as far as what the Permitting Council is trying to do in this administration, we are really highlighting as many oil and gas projects as possible, working on pipeline development. But as I referenced earlier, we have 19 sectors that we are required by statute to work on. So that pretty much covers the majority of the energy or manufacturing infrastructure. A lot of our projects have been in the critical mineral mining space. That's something that we have gotten over 30 projects on our dashboard for since the beginning of this year. We almost have 80 total projects on our dashboard, 50 total of which have come in since January. But one thing we're also seeing too is an increase in interest in deep sea mining. That has also been a priority for this administration. But also in Louisiana, the Permitting Council hasn't worked with the state of Louisiana in a few years, and we're eager and excited to get more projects on our dashboard that are within the state.
That's great. Well, I think we all welcome that, so keep at it. We talked a lot about federal, and of course, there's a great connection between what happens at a state and a federal level. So much of when I talk about that 25% of the state's economy, a lot of it is dependent on how our industry is received in Washington. But to focus a little bit more on what's happening in Baton Rouge right now, Eric, so we've seen here in the last couple of years the changes of a political administration in Baton Rouge, from Governor Edwards' administration now to Governor Jeff Landry's administration. The previous term, the state had a climate task force and worked towards a climate action plan, which led to a lot of new investments. We're here talking about future energy. The administration has changed, but some of that continues. CCUS, however you want to phrase it, clearly one of those. What is your take? You've been working in this space for quite a while, at the current regulatory environment and kind of just the posture of where the state is and what that means for future investments. How do you see it?
Well, I guess it's the old one-handed economist argument.
Right.
You see some positive things, you see some negative things. I'm going to tend to stress the negative things right now, but generally the state, on a positive side, has all this capital expenditure that's gone on. We have continuing expenditures, a lot of it foreign capital coming in, like the steel mill we were talking about earlier, and like the LNG terminals. All of those have foreign investment included. The other, Eric, has some foreign investment as well. So we are attracting capital to the area. The bad news is, and I can point fingers at both administrations, Governor John Bel Edwards had a law put in place that gives local parishes sort of a veto power on the location of new facilities. The current administration had a law passed just this past session, which attacks eminent domain, and I don't want to get into a long diatribe on eminent domain. It's probably the least democratic thing in the U.S. political setup. But what eminent domain says is that if you are a landowner and somebody wants to build a pipeline through your property, you can refuse to do it. They have to pay you for it, for the right-of-way, obviously, and a fair price. But if eminent domain is invoked, which is both a state and a federal option, what eminent domain is the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So that if you are going to stop a pipeline that's going to support heating homes in New England for 250,000 people because you don't want to look at a pipeline crew that's going to be there for maybe 6 months, you don't have that right. What you have is a sort of a compelled participation, and you will be adequately reimbursed for your inconvenience, but you cannot stop the pipeline.
Right.
Here, this recent law that was passed, and bear in mind, Louisiana has more pipeline mileage per capita than any place else on earth.
Right.
You know, we have a lot of pipelines. All of those pipelines are subject to that eminent domain rule, except carbon dioxide. And without the ability to, you know, sequester the CO2 that's being emitted, a lot of that enthusiasm for investment is going to go away. So it's a very critical kind of an issue. I can certainly understand people in a parish, and a parish president or a state representative, state senator, can count noses just as well as anybody else. And some parishes, like Cameron Parish, has very few people. Most of them are millionaires at this point. I'm exaggerating, but they think a pipeline's fine. But you go one parish over in Calcasieu Parish, and they don't think so. And that ability to stop not the generation of the CO2, not the injection of the CO2, but the connection between the two is kind of a fatal wound, if you will, if you're trying to look forward to greater capital expenditures in LNG exports. We have to think of ourselves as an export nation, and we don't generally think that way. But when you look at something like LNG or natural gas liquids, another big product, more for Texas than us, but those products don't have a market in the United States. They only have a market in the international market, and half of it goes to China. So needless to say, we need to think about optimizing that includes the world market, not just what's happening to a few jobs in Louisiana or somebody's household.
I do agree. I hope that we continue at the state level to keep a big picture view. I think Louisiana's opportunity are the markets of the world in many ways, and I've been very much involved in some of the debates you're talking about, and I think what we're here talking about future energy. We're building on the expertise that we've seen in our industry across this state and obviously the country for decades. It is going to be very important. This is one of those interesting places, as you've seen some opposition to CCS here in Louisiana. It's happened at the same time where the Trump administration continues to show support. Secretary Burgum recently addressed a group of legislators from Louisiana in Washington a few weeks ago and continued to push to say, do not miss these opportunities. Quite honestly, opportunities that will take the traditional benefits of the energy industry beyond the coast, the Mississippi River corridor, and spread them to more rural parts of the state. So I think that is going to be extremely important. And going back to the federal level, and particularly sitting in Louisiana, we have an interesting relationship with Congress because of the roles of Speaker Johnson and Leader Scalise, and of course, members of the Louisiana delegation have led on energy for a long time. What is your view of, so we've talked a lot about what needs to happen, about just how Congress is moving forward. There is a lot of discussion about permitting reform now that we've passed, the one big beautiful bill. What are your views of both the administration and Congress, and what can be done, even maybe at our level, to help support their efforts to make positive change?
Yeah, great question. So first I'll say Congress in the last few years has scored a couple first downs on permitting reform. So as part of the Fiscal Responsibility Act that lifted the debt ceiling, I think 2 years ago, there was some permitting reforms included in there. And then in the Big Beautiful Bill Act, which is a reconciliation bill, Congress really tried to push the envelope on, can we do some statutory permitting reform in there as well? They were limited procedurally by what they could do, but there were a few important elements of that. So that being said, what we really need for a big congressional deal on permitting reform is bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate, because this needs 60 votes in the House, 60 votes in the Senate. And so what you're seeing right now is sort of bicameral, bipartisan, grassroots discussion on what do we agree on, where can we come together, and that's honestly going to trickle up to the leaders who have already indicated their support for putting permitting reform on the floor. I think Leader Scalise in particular has said, I'm going to bring these bills to the floor. The Senate has a very similar effort going on with, a bipartisan group. And so all of the things that need to be happening are happening right now. And there's a lot of very positive momentum for permitting reform to happen. I think part of what's driving this right now is, first of all, there's a realization that the problems that have been impacting, frankly, oil and gas for, previously is now impacting every form of energy, from renewables to geothermal to offshore. And so it's bringing together a coalition of folks that want to fix this problem. And then you layer on top of that the data center AI race that we are in with China. And you look at China by comparison, they have increased the amount of power generation in their country by 800% since 2000, and now have about 2.5 times the generation capacity that this country has. So they are not letting self-imposed barriers stand in the way of building the power generation that they need to try to win the AI race. And we cannot let these self-imposed outdated barriers stand in our way to be able to build the energy infrastructure that we need to both keep energy reliable and affordable in the U.S., but also to compete and win the AI race with China.
And I'd say we're seeing it play out here on the ground in Louisiana. I mean, we have this metadata center that has been announced for Richland Parish. Again, I go back to a rural community, part of the state that traditionally has not benefited from oil and gas or large manufacturing investments. And I think somebody told me earlier this week, one of the complaints is not that they're doing all this work and sourcing it from outside the community. It's almost gotten to the point now to where they're saying, hey, leave somebody off this project that can help us with everything else we want to get done, which is a tremendous problem to have, but it is very much, I think, representative here on the ground on why we have to get all things right. Louisiana hasn't had a large conversation about electricity and transmission in the grid, but it's coming, and the federal government is going to play a role in that, and we need to do it all simultaneously. This isn't a time for there to be a disconnect between state capitals and Washington, to say the least. I'm going to go ahead, Taylor, to you. I mean, obviously we're watching Congress very closely in the reform debate, but the administration has a key role here, and you're here, and the Permitting Council clearly has their mission. How does the administration's work, sorry about that, match up with the congressional process, the legislative process? Yeah,
so it's very interesting. And as I referenced earlier, I'm a congressional staffer at my core, having spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill. And to Ann's point, I mean, we have seen an early engagement on permitting reform, which is a really healthy sign. We're not seeing the typical action of, let's just tack it onto NDAA, which is what we typically see every year, which I think is really exciting. We're seeing some bipartisan support in the House. Natural Resources Committee, specifically Congressman Westerman from Arkansas, is putting out a lot of great permitting reform legislation, which is hopefully working towards a larger package. As I referenced earlier, in the administration, we are really trying to do everything that we can within our own jurisdiction in the meantime, because we know that permitting reform can be a lengthy process. That being said, I mean, we're working very closely with our partners at CEQ, so the Council of Environmental Quality in the White House, National Energy Dominance Council. They are really leading. A lot of times we get the question, what's the difference between Permitting Council and Energy Dominance Council? Sure. And we're quite different, but I see how that could be confusing to the outside eye. But Energy Dominance Council is really leading on those policy reform issues. They are meeting with industry and they're hearing where those concerns are, and they're wanting to make real change with those issues. We at the Permitting Council are working closer with the interagency coordination and making sure permits are completed in time, or holding agencies or companies accountable for a delayed process. But all that to say, I think it is really promising. I'm not always the optimist when it comes to what is going to get done on a congressional timeline, but I mean, things are really pointing in the right direction.
I'm glad to hear that, because it is important. And, one of the areas maybe not directly represented up here that I keep thinking about a lot of my members are refineries, significant amount of refining capacity here in Louisiana. There is a lot that these refineries knew. They have been fighting Corps of Engineers issues, they've been fighting EPA issues, and we're not even trying to build new refineries at this point. We're just trying to make sure we can continue to invest the capital that we need so that they can be prepared to fuel the nation and quite honestly, the world. And so that's extremely important. Eric, I'm gonna come back to you. And NOIA is a great partner of LMOGA's. I'm always happy to say, and a lot of the conversations we've had over the past several years has been the political influence, and we go back to the pause on LNG, the lapse in the 5-year offshore leasing plan, and an anemic, and I'm trying to be generous, a number of lease sales once that finally moved forward, and of course now we've seen some things change. Just talk from your perspective, both in the industry, at the trade association level, NOIA level. Talk about the political influence and the impact that has, good or bad, on the industry as it's trying to move forward.
Yeah, appreciate the question, Tommy. But the first thing I want to make sure, kind of echoing what Eric said, is on the positives. One of the things that we see, especially where our primary counterparties, our primary regulators, are in the federal government, Bessie Bohm, we see a really smart, energetic, and a good counterparty there. The rank and file are very good, and they're trying to regulate our business safely. They're trying to get to good answers. And so I think that when you think about that, the baseline is good, right? I think that most of the folks, may I say all of the folks that we deal in regulatory universe with the government really wants what's best for our country and what's best for best for the companies. And so what that tells you is, okay, well, we need to make sure that we have the political will to go forward. And you bring up lease sales. This has been, as an exploration company, kind of item one, right? Is, okay, well, if you don't have lease sales, well, then you're not able to predictably go forward. You're not able to replenish your hopper in terms of prospects. You're not able to convince investors, hey, this is a basin that we have a future. This is a basin that, with new data, as a geoscientist, the thing that I can tell you about the Gulf Basin is that, that we are embarking on a new age of seismic, which is unlocking the ability to find prospects. And if you are able to use that to find the prospects, to build the development, well, then we actually need the pathway to be able to lease it for the companies and to unlock the resources for our country. And so, but so that's like the macro picture. On the micro picture, we need to make sure we're continuing to find the political will. We've talked a lot about the Louisiana political will, and I think that it is real and it's sincere, and the same thing with Texas. But when we're looking at bigger pictures, sometimes our efforts are finding the folks in other districts and other parts of the country who touch our business. We've got partners who are headquartered out of in the past and in the present out of Arkansas and New Jersey and New Mexico. We partner with the Southern Ute Indian tribe in Colorado, and so we have pipe that's manufactured in Ohio. We spent on the Salamanca project, tens of millions of dollars with the company in King County, Washington. So when we meet with Congress and the city of Seattle and say, look, one of our biggest suppliers is here in the Puget Sound, they look at you a little bit confused. But it's a national business that's bringing jobs nationally. I talked about the Salamanca project and the refurb. One of the things that we're proudest about that is that a lot of these projects are built overseas, right? Korea, China, Indonesia, or whatnot. This is a project where all of the heavy work, 97% of the work was done here on the Gulf Coast. I try to talk to people about sustainability. What is sustainability? And that there's economic sustainability. And that, you know, we show this map of all of the yards from Corpus Christi to Bayou La Battery, that all of this work has been performed by tens of thousands of people here in the Gulf Coast, and that's once we are able to communicate that effort, I think people start to think of this broader. It's not just as an oil and gas concept, but a jobs concept as well.
I think that's a great perspective, and I just remind all of you in the audience, we may have a moment here for a question or two at the end. So if you have one, you see on the screen here over to the side. Go ahead and click that QR code. Eric, let's go back to the state for a second.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about political influence, and we didn't get as much into kind of the impact of NGOs and some of those organizations that try to push back and stop the industry. But at the state level, we are seeing a lot of activity at different levels to try to stop some of these newer investments, whether it is carbon capture. We've had, quite frankly, at the state level, we had people try to stop LNG facilities and that growth as well. Where do you see in the current environment, what do you see as some of the risks facing some of this new investment, some of this future energy investment that we are trying to move forward with?
Well, I think that one of the more obvious areas is this CCS you mentioned earlier. This is carbon capture and sequestration. And for years, the industrial sector in Louisiana, mostly oil and gas, has produced CO2 emissions just as a part of the process of making the finished products, whether it's ammonia fertilizer for Ohio or it's additional alcohol for use in chemical processing or whatever. When you start thinking in terms of the statewide benefits of these things, yes, they're big plants, and nobody really wants to live next door to a big plant, right? But at the same time, those plants employ this 15% chunk of our population, or the working population, and they are supplying useful products not just for the Gulf Coast energy states. They're supplying the bulk of the renewable diesel for California. They're supplying the bulk of lots of the materials that go into the plastics industry in other states. So we have to be able to do a better job, perhaps, of educating the public of what the choices really are. If you listen just to the news or the environmental arguments, what you will hear is all of the bad points. And they'll brush off the good points, right? Like a sustainable economy, as Eric was talking about. And yes, there are going to be political pressures on legislators. We need to figure out ways to help those legislators produce a convincing argument that people will buy. And one of the good news items that's coming along well, and you might hear more about it at the later session that I'm moderating, but the ability to sequester CO2 in the Hackberry field, which is in Cameron Parish. Hackberry, incidentally, was the field that produced most of the crude oil that went into helping us win World War II. A little side project there. But we just had last week the permission granted to drill the first CO2, what we jargon term is a type 6 well.
That's right.
To dispose of CO2 that's unavoidably produced when you liquefy LNG. And we don't need a pipeline for that, but it would be nice if we could put in a pipeline, because we have a bunch of other LNG terminals that don't have that facility next door to them. Cameron LNG does. So that's where that first well will be.
Yeah, and I think we do as we look at pressure to stop CO2 lines. We want to be very careful, because our industry, not just in Louisiana but across the nation, relies on the connectivity across the industry. And Louisiana, quite frankly, was one of the first states to receive Class 6 primacy from the EPA because of our expertise and knowledge and ability to regulate safely the construction operation of those lines. And so I think that's particularly important. I'm looking to the back of the room. I don't know if we have any questions that were submitted from the audience.
We do.
Great.
In your opinion, will a mandatory cap and trade system be required to ensure investment in the energy transition?
Who would like to jump in on that one? Eric, maybe?
We've, interestingly enough, I'm a student of history. Louisiana helped invent cap and trade, and at the time I was working for Ethel Corporation. We wanted to get rid of lead in gasoline, and they said, well, you produce half of it in the world, why don't you figure it out? So Louisiana did do that and did it successfully, with Ethel being the referee, because they knew what everybody needed and when they needed it and so on. So I think, yes, it could have a role to play. I would prefer to see people do cap and trade with businesses that are inherently viable, whatever the answer is. So if someone is in a particular part of the country where solar is in abundance or wind is in abundance, and you have installed capacity, and somebody says, well, we can put in batteries and produce a dispatchable power, fine, let them do it. That's the right answer. But don't come down to Louisiana and mandate that Louisiana put in wind turbines in a state that has the lowest power costs in the country, because it's just not economically viable.
Great.
I might just
And
jump in here. I was a Hill staffer in the early 2000s when they tried to pass federal cap and trade. And at the time, I won't be able to pull the exact numbers, but the predictions about how much emissions would be reduced if this federal cap and trade system was enacted have actually been far surpassed because of the shale revolution and because of the American energy revolution, which has led to this abundance of natural gas, which has displaced, not entirely, but supplemented coal as a much lower emitting fuel source for power generation. So if you look at the emissions reductions that have been achieved over the last 15 years, the majority of those reductions are simply from the increased use of natural gas, which has happened in a way that has generated jobs and economic growth and kept energy prices really low. So I would just say, I don't have a specific answer to this question or a position on it, but that what we've seen in history is that investing in technology and low-cost energy, low-cost sort of best of the above energy solutions to enable us to meet energy demand in the most efficient and lowest environmental footprint way has worked for us, at least over the last couple decades.
The ability of our industry to continue to raise the bar on themselves and invest in innovation and new technologies, that is the path forward, I think, in many, many ways. Well, I am looking at the clock, and it has hit 0. I want to thank all of you for joining us here in New Orleans, one of the greatest cities in the world. We appreciate all that you do for the industry. And I would just close with that, whether you look at right now, the global, national, or even the state and local perspective, it is a dynamic but a very exciting time, I think, for the industry. We are recommitting in many ways to existing technologies. We are investing for future growth in those. We are investing in new technologies, innovation. Once again, I just can't say it enough. Is just going to unlock so many doors, and it's great for the energy economy. It's great for the state's economy, for those of us who live here. And so I just want to say thank you all for joining and offering your thoughts with the audience. I appreciate you. Let's give the panel a round of applause. Thank you,
Tommy.
Thank you, Tommy.
Thank you for joining us. Our next session in this space will be Commercial Leadership and Low Carbon Innovation, featuring Jeffrey Richardson, Senior Vice President at ExxonMobil, and that will begin at 11:10.